Hi, I'm Terrell Turner, the host of the Finance and Accounting Show. And today we're talking about a topic that is very, very important to a lot of accounting firms, whether it's law firms, whether it's, finance firms. And that is, how do you manage the risk that is involved with how you run your business? Because, one of the things that we hear a lot talked about is if your law firm is malpractice, or if you're in a finance and accounting, you hear it as for professional insurance, liability insurance, E&Os. And as we start to evolve more and more in our businesses and we start using more and more technology and third party apps, cybersecurity becomes an even bigger topic. So we're going to dive into those topics today. So stay tuned for today's episode. So without further ado, I want to bring on my guest, Jock Wols. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Charles, how you doing? Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's my pleasure, and day is going great. Now I know before we start, we hopped on and we had some email correspondence. I know today's been a kind of a busy day for you. So how have things been going today?
Just one fire drill to the next, but that's a good thing. So,
one of the things that I think about, like, accounting and finance professionals, just as well as like legal professionals, understand, about putting out fires. But whenever I'm talking to someone where their business is related to risk and protect, I'm like, the fires you must put out probably seem a bit more extreme than the fires we have to put out.
well, not necessarily, because your fire is also my fire. So it just really depends. And yeah, I mean, I'm pretty excited to talk about risk management as a whole. It's there's various parts to managing the risk of your business, and various tools, tactics, solutions, products that you can use. But when my clients are faced with a difficult situation, it's all hands on deck often. And yeah, I'm excited to share more about that. So.
Absolutely. And, I'm looking forward to this conversation because, I mean, even as we've done over 530 different interviews, and a lot of times when talking to business owners, when you ask them about, what are some of your top concerns or things that, they talk about things like, marketing, getting clients and stuff like that. And what I realize is, many don't realize the amount of risk that is unaddressed in their business. So I'm super excited to talk about that in this conversation. But before we jump into the details, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you found yourself, protecting people from the risk that they may or may not be thinking about?
Yeah, so I operate in the insurance industry. I'm an insurance broker and agent, and specialize in professional liability and cyber liability insurance, predominantly for accounting firms, law firms, bookkeepers, and so forth. And I started my career a while back, and really worked for an insurance company for good 15. Almost 15 years before I kind of moved onto the insurance agency side. So through the insurance, through underwriting risk, I kind of got to talk to clients, understand, dig into their business practices, and then we obviously collaborated with the claims department quite extensively to really try to the problematic areas, address what's kind of going on, and then provide some value back to the clients in terms of like, hey, what are the best practices you can do? These are some of the things that you can mitigate or reduce your risk. And yeah, so from a so the background has kind of led me down this path where now I advise my clients directly in terms of like, okay, what do you do from an insurance application perspective? But if you really take a step back, you got to think about risk management as a whole. The insurance piece is just you're transferring the risk. That's one tool that you have at your disposal. But you really have to think about risk management as a whole, and how can you mitigate and protect your business and protect you know, the livelihood that you've kind of built up over a period of time.
Gotcha. You know, and I think that's a very, you know, interesting perspective to talk about, because, you know, one of the things that I ran into is, even in asking, when I started my firm, of asking people like, hey, I'm looking for E&O insurance and any recommendations. And a lot of times people would say, hey, yeah, you know, you can call this person, they're really good. And I would ask, okay, what makes them good? Because
Yeah.
I had like no idea how to pick a good one. I mean, or I was like, how do you determine like what's the difference between, like, you know, a good professional liability package and then, you know, and one that's mediocre or not so good? So, you know, as you started to, you know, get into this industry, you know, with insurance and getting into professional liability, did you find that, you know, there's a wide variety of like the different types of things that are protected under it, or do most policies tend to look the same?
I mean, it depends. So when we're talking about professional liability, it's a relatively standardized product in terms of the threats that product addresses, and really all it does, it protects you in the event that you have committed or alleged to have committed a wrongful act, right? So if you mess something up, your client suffers a financial loss as a result of that negligent act, they will sue you, or they will look to you to make them whole again. And that's where the policy kind of kicks in. And so that product really has two kind of key policy benefits. One is a payment for what's settled or what's negotiated between you as a defendant and the client, who's the plaintiff, and then the payment of any claims expenses. And this product has been in existence for decades, and it has changed. There's some bells and whistles. So when I work with those clients, we kind of look at, okay, is the coverage appropriate? Are there any bells and whistles that are missing? But really also, what's the scope of services that you provide to your clients, and do you have the right policy in place? You know, for most law firms, they will have a lawyer's professional liability policy, and that's, in terms of the scope of services that are covered, that's perfectly fine. For accounting firms, it can be a little more complicated because there's varying, a couple of different solutions available. So you really want to be specific about what does the definition of professional services say that you're covered for. So if you kind of equate it to your engagements with your clients, it's, okay, what are you hired to do by your clients? What are you hired to do, and what are you not hired to do? And so in a similar kind of way, that's how the insurance policy reads. But when I speak to, you know, a policy evaluation is first and foremost making sure that the pricing is right. Pricing premium drives a lot of the decision making, but then you can also find solutions that are tailored to a particular group. And so what I mean by that is, for example, defense law firms. They may, there's a program out there that's sponsored by the DRI, the Defense Research Institute, and so they specialize in writing defense firms. And so because they've got a pretty decent market share of that, they can provide some more preferred rates and provide broader coverage too. So you try to find, okay, who's the client, understand their kind of requirements, understand their risk profile, and then match them, see what the coverage says, and then match them with the right solution. And and often that also means marketing the application to ensure that the deal or the terms are reflective of the current market conditions.
Now, I mean, I guess with so many things changing now, and, you know, how accountants or how, you know, bookkeepers are approaching their business, you know, how often, you know, have you seen people, you know, actually go through and do the research to say, hey, does the professional liability insurance I have now actually match the way that I'm approaching my business?
Yeah, so one of the challenges, I guess, from the policyholder's perspective, is you often also rely on your agent or your broker, and so you're relying on them to kind of go through the marketing exercise. And while there's a value in continuity and coverage with the same carrier, so you don't want to be seen as switching carrier year in, year out for, you know, $50 or $100 savings. That's almost counterproductive, because the next insurer who's going to look at that, they're like, okay, well, we don't want to, you know, it makes it less competitive. You really want to have the insurer earn the right to win their business and really sharpen their pencils. So a big role that the agent or broker plays is making sure that they market and shop the application around, and then they provide you with that feedback, and then jointly you kind of make that decision on, okay, these are the different options. This is the cheapest. This is the most expensive. Blah blah blah. You kind of go through. The broker's supposed to take more of an advisory kind of role, and so the big question for you is, okay, is my broker doing that? Are they kind of delivering that, or are they just on autopilot? Do they really care about me, or are they just kind of pushing it through a system and say, hey, here's your option, kind of go again? And in some cases, that's not necessarily a bad thing, where if it's already price competitive, but you want to make sure that they communicate with you, and they share and they provide you with that feedback.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense, because one of the things that I've seen from quite a bit of firm owners, where they switch from, let's say they started off doing bookkeeping, now they say, hey, we've added doing tax returns, or now we've added doing tax strategy, and it's just like from an outside looking in perspective, it's like the dynamic of how much your clients are relying on your advice changes when you go from doing basic bookkeeping to tax strategy. I'm like, that there's a different level of reliance. To me, it just seems like there's probably a different level of risk, but I guess would a insurance company look at that and say, hey, yes, you're in a different risk profile now?
Yeah, it's a very perceptive, in terms of like, if you think about the bookkeeping practice area, that tends to be categorized lower risk compared to public audit work, for example, or securities work. Clearly, so insurers, they do take a look at that, and they do take a look at your risk profile, and that is one metric or one factor that influences, one, whether they want to offer insurance to you, and then two, what that premium looks like. So where it gets, if you're transitioning from a bookkeeping practice, and this is one of the issues that we've seen, is in some cases those policies, kind of going back to the definition of professional services, will only define the scope of services that you're covered for as bookkeeping, full stop. It doesn't provide you for coverage for tax services or accounting or consulting, et cetera, et cetera. So you want to just be, and the other approach that insurers take, or a different set of insurers take, is they say, hey, what do you do? I'm a bookkeeper. Okay, well, bookkeeping falls under the accounting industry grouping. So the definition of professional services means anything accounting related, tax preparer, old agent, et cetera, et cetera. And it doesn't really, whether you provide those services in those capacities or not, it doesn't really matter. But what they do at renewal, they'll review your risk profile, and so that could impact the pricing, but you're automatically covered for those services. So that's one kind of pitfall that some bookkeepers find themselves in. It's like, hey, I want to expand my practice at some stage. I want to expand my product shelf. Does the scope of services that I provide match what I'm covered for under the insurance policy?
I think that's a really good point, because I from just conversations I've had with, fellow firm owners, is I don't know if a lot of them are actually thinking about that as they're, pivoting their business, especially when we went from, a lot of firms started saying, oh, I'll offer CFO services. And it's just like, well, does that change your risk profile, and are you actually covered still? Like, is your policy, does it still cover you for this new change that you're making? So thanks for pointing that out.
Now, yeah, and that's just from the professional liability piece. That is one of the takeaways for the audience, is to say, hey, what are the scope of services I'm providing to my clients, and does that match with what's defined under the insurance policy, under the professional liability policy? So, and if you're listening, at renewal, or when you have a moment, just look at your policy and look for under the definitions section and say, definitions, okay, professional services means ... Okay, is it pretty broad, or is it pretty restricted? And even if it's restricted, it's fine, as long as it falls, the scope of services you provide fall under that definition.
Mm-hmm. Okay, awesome. Now, one of the questions that someone asked me, and I was like, this is a good a good question that I don't have the answer to. So, and it was, they were starting a bookkeeping business. Well, because I have a bookkeeping business, I'm not really producing financials that are being relied on by the public.
Yeah.
Do I really need professional liability if I'm just doing a bookkeeping business? And I guess when someone asks that question, how do you kind of think about that question?
Well, by default, I'll always recommend securing an insurance solution. But really, what you want to think about is, okay, well, what's the value that the potential insurance solution can provide to you, and what are you doing with your business, and how are you kind of building it up, right? And so you're building up this this business, this practice, and what is it worth to you, right? And what is the adverse the downside of maybe committing an error and paying or having that stress associated with trying to resolve it versus the premium that you pay for an insurance policy. So you got to kind of think about, okay, what are you looking to protect? You'll know your risk better than anyone else, but can you really control every single scenario, every single risk point that could potentially lead to a claim? So it's in a way it can be a trade-off, but the understated benefit of an insurance policy or of a professional liability policy is the claims handling support. Because if you find yourself in a difficult situation where a client is threatening to sue you or is suing you, what do you do? It's not just, hey, I got to pay $5,000, $10,000, $100,000 to kind of get that to make them whole again. But it's also, okay, where do I start? Who's the lawyer that which lawyer is going to represent me? The allegations are frivolous. How do I defend myself? The emotional stress, and then that ripple effect that has on the rest of your business can be pretty dramatic. So at least having someone in your corner who's going to fight for you and defend you and help you resolve it and really take the lead on that is almost invaluable.
Hmm. Yeah, I can definitely see that because one of the things that I tell people a lot of times when you have a accounting firm, bookkeeping firm, or a CFO firm, or you have a law firm, your reputation is a huge part of your marketing. I mean, if you don't have a good reputation, your chances of winning new business drops dramatically.
Significantly. And so think about, you already face sales pressures on a day-to-day basis. You face pressures by your clients, and then when that gets elevated because of a potential incident or some other adverse effect that you're dealing with that the insurance claims department can deal with, that has a ripple effect. And so you won't be able to spend as much time serving your clients because you're being dragged into trying to defend yourself or trying to figure out how to navigate this particular allegation. So it's and then like you said, your reputation, if you don't respond appropriately or quickly to your clients or serve them as best as you can, then that has a ripple effect on driving sales and winning new business.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, one of the areas that is becoming a hotter, an even hotter topic for a lot of firms is, as they start using and implementing more technology and really looking at kind of that cybersecurity. Now, I've heard of some professional liabilities adding a cybersecurity certification. So can you talk a little bit about what you've seen and the trends in the cybersecurity space?
Yeah, and then really the best way to address cyber insurance and cyber risk or cyber threats is to kind of think back to 10 years ago, where the main threat that a business faced was a data breach or a hacking event. And so as a result of that loss of information, that business incurred expenses such as credit monitoring, notification, IT forensic expenses. There could be a business interruption component, et cetera, et cetera. And so what businesses did on a very high level, from a very high level perspective, to identify or assess their risk profile is they'd say, what industry do I operate in? Is it an industry with a big target on its back? So think financial services or healthcare, etc. And what's the information that I carry or access or have access to? So is it credit cards, social security numbers, sensitive information, confidential information, names, address, blah, 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 blah. And how much of it do I have? right? And so so fast forward to a couple of years ago, those threats have now evolved, and threats such as ransomware, phishing, wire transfer fraud have really become popular amongst cyber criminals. And if you really think about what those threats represent, ransomware, for example, it's an operational risk. It locks your system, your hardware, it renders you inoperable. You can't deal with your partners, with your clients, et cetera, et cetera. So, and if you think about that operational risk, the impact that it has on who is at risk or who is an attractive target by the cyber criminals, it really opens up the market for cyber criminals, because it doesn't really matter whether the information that you have access to or possess is sensitive. If you can't deal with your clients or serve your clients, you've got a problem, right? You're handcuffed. And so from the cyber market has changed from just mainly large businesses being a threat or vulnerable to or an attractive target, to now small business being an attractive target to cyber criminals. And so what you were kind of talking about in terms of the endorsement that, hey, let's bundle your E&O or your professional liability with some cyber coverage, that started maybe five plus years ago. And really at that stage, if you think about it in terms of the threats, small businesses didn't face, those threats weren't as significant or as material as they are today. So what insurers did is like, hey, small business, small law firms saying, well, I'd like some cyber insurance. I don't really think I need it. I'm not really vulnerable. So insurers would just kind of chuck it in as a quote unquote coverage enhancement. So they would provide you that protection in the event of a data breach or hacking, right? What's happened today, that coverage is completely outdated. So it doesn't cover you for ransomware or wire transfer fraud or phishing. So you have to really think. So from a policyholder's perspective, you're thinking, okay, well, I'm managing, I'm transferring my risk, I'm managing my risk. I've got my professional liability policy, and I've got this rider or endorsement to kind of protect me for cyber risk. When in reality, you're only protected for a very small part of the risk. And really, the analogy that I use is almost like buying with the endorsement. So in general, most endorsements equals bad or equals bad, that they offer inadequate coverage. Not always, but in general, that's the case. So it's almost like buying a homeowner's insurance policy that only covers you for the basement. It doesn't cover you for the ground floor, for the second floor, for your roof, for your garage, but it still says cyber on top of it, right? And so you think, okay, I'm covered for cyber risk, when in reality it's only a small portion for that. So that's where we are with the cyber insurance market today. Is the range of insurance solutions is incredibly varied, and you have to be extremely critical about what type of solution you want to elect for your business.
So, I mean, speaking of that, I mean, I think, cybersecurity is one of those areas that probably most lawyers, most accountants, and bookkeepers, they don't really understand, hey, cybersecurity to the depth. So it's like, how can they navigate that of, making sure that they get the right type of cybersecurity coverage? I mean, is there any kind of rules of thumb or any recommendations you have for people on that?
Yeah, so there's, in terms of the actual coverage part, there's sort of 3 indicators that you can kind of look at in your insurance solution or insurance solutions that are presented to you that can act as to tell you whether it's a good or bad solution or an inadequate solution. It's really, is ransomware covered? That's the first thing. Is wire transfer fraud covered? And is phishing or social engineering fraud covered? Those, and especially the phishing or social engineering fraud, those tend to be, that is the one coverage part that insurers are looking at right now, that they're like, hey, this exposure is really broad. We need to kind of rein it in. So cyber insurers are actively trying to rein in that social engineering fraud coverage. So you want to make sure within your that your solution represents those 3 coverage parts.
Gotcha. And I guess, to get a clearer understanding, when you say ransomware, how would you define, like, what is ransomware?
So there's two parts to it. There's the extortion part of it, someone trying to extort you for money, and so they hold your system hostage. But then there's also malware or a virus that locks your system, and basically the screen goes black and it says, "Hey, send X amount of Bitcoin to this wallet," right? And then we'll give you the decryption key, and you can be on your way. So it's also the payment of that ransom that these policies should cover.
Okay, awesome. And then when you talk about social engineering, can you talk a little bit, explain a little bit more about what that is or what that
Yeah.
involves?
So social engineering fraud is, and then the terms are used a little interchangeably, and they vary a little. But think of it as deceptive communication, where the cyber criminal tries to trick you into taking a certain action. Okay, and so those actions can represent a couple of different things. Firstly, it could be they try to get you to click on a file that then downloads a virus onto your computer or into your system. they can try to get you to open a link that asks for your login credentials. So a fake bank account, a fake bank website says, "Hey, log in here. You've got a security notification," and you try to put in those login credentials, and you keep on failing, and they've got your login credentials. They can try to trick you into wiring money to the wrong account, and say, "Hey, they intercept communication between you and whoever." It's like, "Oh, by the way, how was weekend camping?" And it could be a legitimate transaction. They say, "By the way, we've opened a new bank account. Please send the money here." And then the fourth thing is they can try to trick you into amending bank account information in an accounts payable system. So think of it like a payroll system or something. Something like that. Those are the four main kind of outcomes or cyber security incidents that stem from a phishing attack.
Okay, gotcha. No, that makes sense, and those are ones that, unfortunately, we've seen those increase more and more, and it doesn't seem like that's gonna slow down. So yeah, that's definitely a growing risk area.
It is a growing risk area, and so if you kind of if you kind of step back and think about, hey, what's my risk management strategy, right? The insurance piece is one part of it, but as a small business, you have to make sure that you can address or manage those from a best practices perspective. So, 12 months ago, I could have gone to an insurer and said, "Hey, this client wants an insurance policy." They say, "Hey, what's the name and address?" Here you go. Those days have gone. The cyber insurers have really taken it on the chin, and most of their portfolios are unprofitable. So really, what that means is that they're increasing their rates. That's the easy part. So they're jacking up the premiums. They're trying to address the different coverage parts in terms of restricting coverage. So social engineering fraud is one thing that they're eyeing, but then they're also asking more best practices questions. So basically increasing businesses' cyber risk hygiene. And the latter part is actually, that's not a bad thing, because if you think about it, if on an aggregated basis, businesses make it more difficult for cyber criminals to kind of penetrate a system or intercept communication or steal funds, then it makes it more expensive for them to operate, right? So that has a positive long-term effect. But it's that best practices piece which you actually can't avoid as a small business. You have to pay some attention, and you have to make sure that's an ongoing initiative for your business. So education is a big part of it. With social engineering, fraud, or phishing, if you know that, hey, if I get a sketchy email and someone asks me to wire some money, well, if you know that threat exists, then you might think twice about it, and you should really, but you call the requester and say, "Hey, I got this email from you. Is that legit? Can you just confirm that?" If they say yes, then you go for it. If no, then you're being targeted.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. That's one of those things that I remember when working at a couple Fortune 500 companies where, every so often the IT team would run a
Yeah,
test on
I
those
was just gonna
things of
say.
just send out an email like that. And it was always shocking to see the percentage of people that actually clicked the link when they got the email, to where it's just
Yep.
like, oh my gosh, like, if 55% of the people who got that email clicked on it, like, oh my gosh, we are like in trouble if this was real.
Yeah, I know, and it's. I mean, you also got to give credit to the cyber criminals because they identify. I mean, it's not them someone who's sitting and sending an email. I mean, they've got actual. I mean, it's almost like a sales funnel, and they know which buttons to push. If they say, "Hey, here's your receipt for your Norton antivirus that cost for $500. Open this invoice," and you're like, $500? It costs 100. That's ridiculous. It's like they try to create a reaction out of you, right? And you're like, that is not on. What does this say? And then you're like, whoa, you gotta go sign, right? Or if they intercept communication between you and legitimate communication and insert themselves into these cyber criminals are extremely patient. They may just say, "Hey, why the money here?" And so you just got to be careful. And so the education piece is one thing of it. But yeah, I mean, I get it with those simulation tests. It's still like the metrics should be. You'd think we'd think about it a little better, but if you slow it down, of course that's a sketchy email. But if you're doing so many things, you're trying to multitask, you've got so many devices that you're trying to access information on. These things they slip by, and
Yeah.
it's to our detriment, really.
Hmm. So, I mean, I guess speaking of that kind of that best practices, at what size of a company do you tend to see, like, hey, companies that are usually larger than X tend to be good about having some of these best practices in place, but companies smaller than X, they need some room for improvement on these best practices?
Yeah, to be honest, it's not a function of size. And if you think about the largest cyber losses that the insurance market has dealt with, it's Fortune 500 companies with ample resources dedicated to IT infrastructure. So often, size isn't necessarily a function. It's almost it, you know how committed are you to best practices, and how does that filter from the top down? Cyber best practices is an ongoing initiative, and so you have to, when you start if you're a startup bookkeeper or a startup lawyer, I'm not saying you have to implement every single thing, but you have to continue to think about it, right? If you know that insurers and the insurance application actually offers a pretty good sort of roadmap to that extent, in the sense that they'll ask questions, and the only reason why they're asking those questions is because they've identified correlations in their portfolio that have led to a higher likelihood of a loss. So, use those insights, and if they say, okay, the backup of information. If you don't back up of information, okay, well, why are they asking that? It doesn't prevent a cyber attack, but in the event that you are under attack or suffer a cybersecurity incident, it gives you options, and you can access that information. It can get you up and running much quicker. So if you don't do that, I'm not saying that's fine, but put it on your initiative list, right? Put it on the to-do list. It's like something that you need to address at some stage in the future. So it's and these requirements, or these best practice requirements, they will continue to change. So it's not something I can just say, okay, I've checked the box and I'm done for the next 10 years. That's just not going to happen, right? So making sure that you're kind of in tune with it, and just having this setting the tone from the top down is really important.
Awesome, awesome. And I think that is one thing that I've seen from the different companies that I work for is that the companies that tend to really have the discussions about it and make it part of the culture, people seem to be a little bit more aware of, like,
Yeah,
like the phishing emails, and like talking to the head of data security or IT. It's like those companies tend to have a better performance when they run those tests, because they are actually
exactly.
talking about it.
Yeah, general awareness and education is a big part of. It's not the only part, but it is a big contributor of mitigating cyber risk. So if you know that, and I always advise my just state, if you see an article in the press that says, hey, so and so has been suffered a vulnerability, maybe pay a little more attention to it than you had been in the past. Just like, oh, it's like a phishing attack. Okay, well, I don't know what phishing means. Okay, well, let me understand that a little, and just making sure, and then be open. If it's be open about it. Mention it to your partners. It's like in your weekly or monthly meetings, and say, hey, do we have cyber insurance? Does cyber insurance cover ransomware or wire transfer fraud? Do we back up of information? You should, from a management or as a senior partner or as a partner with, don't. There's certainly people who do that probably on your behalf, but also show a little more. Develop a little kind of more internal awareness for yourself in terms of managing that, and that'll help you kind of contribute to the risk management process.
Now that brings up an interesting point, because one of the other things that I've heard some people say is, we're a cloud-based firm. We use cloud-based technology to support our clients. So in their mind, what they have communicated is they believe that the security risk is not on their firm. The security risk is on the third party, application that they're using. It's their job to protect it. From a insurance perspective, how do you guys think about that?
Yeah, so there's some truth to that. If the vulnerability or the data breach is on the software vendor's side, then absolutely. Then you can say, well, it's not me, it's them. They should make us whole again if we suffer financial loss for them, for the software vendor losing data or information, right? But what you can't control is what if that loss of data comes through your channel, right? What if someone logs through your system into that cloud-based provider? If you set up Dropbox or iCloud or Google Drive, is it really compartmentalized in the sense that if someone's on your hardware, can they just extract that information? It's on the cloud, it's encrypted from a Google perspective, but hey, I know I don't have to put a password into any folder that I access, right? Or every morning. So what if the vulnerability is through your network or through your channel? So that's really that's the one part of it in terms of losing information. And then, like I said, the other threats, or some of the other threats, represent more of an operational risk, where it doesn't really matter, the level of information or the type of information. It doesn't really matter if you've got a lot of information of it stored on the cloud. If you can't, if your system is down and you can't access or you can't serve your clients through ransomware, or if the money got wired to the wrong account, okay, well, it's your money. It's not. You need to figure that out, or you need to kind of recover that.
And that brings up, it made me think about I don't know if this is the best practice, but it is something that I've been thinking about more on. Like you said, when you're using those cloud accounts, it's just going back and looking to see, like, how many different devices have I logged into my account from, and are all of them actually me?
Yeah. So, and the bigger businesses, they will alert you if you log in from a different device. But you can even your bank account, you can see where and when, there's a log of where and when you've kind of logged in from. So, managing that, a key piece is multi-factor authentication, which means, the dual authentication process. So if you log into, most banks have it, most software tool providers require that right now. And I was listening to one of your previous guests, and I think she was talking about, multi-factor authentications, and she was like, oh, it's actually a pretty big pain, because now I have to sit next to the owner. And I was sort of, she's got a point. But at the same time, it's like, from a cyber risk perspective, I think that's probably a good thing. So, it's just different objectives, right? But multi-factor authentication is one of the kind of main things to enable, like opt-in every single time. It really reduces the exposure quite significantly. And then the other thing that which you, I know we're kind of going down, covering quite a lot of ground here, but endpoint detection. Basically, you've got a bunch of different devices, and so I speak with a lot of professionals who say, "Hey, I'm working from home. I'm logging in through my home network, but I'm using a VPN. I should be protected." Well, the traffic that if you're connecting remotely, that's private and that's somewhat secure. But the actual devices aren't. So think about your home, your TV, your laptop, your fridge, your Roku or whatever. I mean, you've got a bunch of different your iPhone. Those all would connect to your local network, and then by connecting through that local network, it gives you access to your laptop. So there's there's a huge kind of vulnerability around that. So one thing that will be coming over the next couple of years is insurers are asking, hey, if you work remotely, it's not just the traffic between you and the system. Is your actual device protected, and is your device analyzed for the traffic that happens inter-device from an inter-device perspective? So, and there's some cool companies who are starting to build solutions, especially for small businesses that can help with that. But that's a pretty huge growth area. So.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. That's a really good point to keep in mind. I know even for myself, as I've been like traveling a lot more this year, some outside the US, and that's always one of those things that I think about when it's just like, all right, even if I hop on this person's, Wi-Fi, like in this hotel lobby that I'm in, it's just like, I don't know who else is here or who else is, accessing the network.
Network, right? I mean, that's the question that is in the back of my mind too. It's like, okay, well, if I log onto this network, whose network? It says the hotel name on it, but is it really? I don't know. I'm just kind of, it says in the brochure or whatever that check-in. Okay, well then maybe, but you often see a ton of different like networks that are just out there, and you're like, okay, well, which one is it? So, but yeah, so from that perspective, and you think about, okay, it's your laptop, your device that you're kind of bringing along, and if there's an unwanted party that kind of gets access to it, and they're on there. So if you want to, there's hardware out there where you can actually kind of connect through that hardware, and then that hardware will monitor the traffic that comes through the network. So that's something definitely from an insurance perspective that's going to be, I don't know if it's necessarily going to become a requirement, but certainly more emphasis will be placed on that because it's going to be a vulnerability. It is a vulnerability right now.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, I've really enjoyed the feedback and the perspective that you shared, because I do think that risk in, professional liability, cybersecurity risk, like all those factors are things that, people just aren't educated as much as they should be, considering the reality of the environment that we live in. I mean, with, work has gone more remote. So as you said, cyber, hackers and the scams have become more sophisticated than ever before. And they're only, for lack of a better term, perfecting what they do. So, I mean, it's so important. So if people are interested in connecting with you, finding out a little bit more about you, where can they find you online?
Yeah, you can check out my website at myriskdesk.com, and just feel free to give me a call directly, email me. I try to respond, if not the same day, within 24 hours. Set up an appointment, consultation. More than happy to help. For those bookkeepers or lawyers who trade in a independent contractor or part-time capacity, we've got a program with Nationwide for the professional liability. So certainly hit me up on that. That's ptprocover.com. But yeah, I mean, I try to be responsive, and I speak frequently about cyber risk and professional liability, and just help put together insurance programs that you can have a confidence in, that will help protect your business that you're building up.
Awesome. Well, before we wrap up, one question that I love asking every guest that comes on is, out of, all the things that you've talked about, if there were two things that you wanted to say, hey, Here are two key takeaways that I think you should definitely remember from what we discussed. What would those two takeaways be?
Going to be on the cyber side, and the first thing is coverage is critical. So be very particular and very critical about the coverage that you get when it comes to cyber insurance. And then the second piece, also cyber related, is just recognize that cyber best practices or cyber risk management is an ongoing initiative. Don't keep that it doesn't have to be on the top of your priority list, but make sure it's an item that's a key initiative, and you want to protect your business, and it should go hand in hand with the insurance piece of it.
Awesome. I love it. Well, Jock, thank you so much for being an amazing guest. It's been a pleasure having you.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I enjoyed this talk.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Finance and Accounting Show. If you like what you heard, don't be selfish. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and then share this with a friend, because you know a business owner that could definitely use this insight. So be sure to hit that subscribe button, share it with a friend, and turn on the notification bell so you get all the updates when we release a new episode.